The sun had barely risen, its first light spilling across the wide, rolling plains, turning the grass into a sea of gold and green. Ayani, an Apache woman with eyes as sharp as an eagle's and a gait that spoke of years surviving in the wilderness, moved carefully through the brush. Her long skirt brushed against the undergrowth as she knelt to inspect the plants she had been gathering, roots and herbs her grandmother had taught her to use for healing. The morning was quiet, almost eerily so, broken only by the distant calls of birds and the soft rustling of leaves. She hummed a low tune, a ritual she often performed when alone, something to steady her hands and calm her mind. The solitude of the plains was familiar, a comfort in its own harsh way, but that morning there was a tension in the air she could feel in her bones. Her instincts, honed over years of navigating both wild terrain and human threats, told her to move with caution. She stepped lightly, scanning the ground for snakes, rocks, anything that could harm her. But nothing could have prepared her for the sudden, searing pain that exploded in her thigh. Ayani gasped and stumbled backward, a sharp scream ripping from her throat. Her hand went to her leg instinctively, only to find the puncture wounds of a rattlesnake's fangs hidden beneath the folds of her skirt. Her vision blurred as adrenaline surged, making her limbs feel both heavy and impossibly fast. She sank to the ground, clutching her thigh, biting back a cry that threatened to escape. Every second that passed made the pain spread, a fire creeping through her leg, and fear began to claw at her chest. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. The tall grasses around her swayed as though whispering warnings, the sky stretching endlessly above. She tried to remember the remedies her grandmother had taught her: tie a tight band above the bite, make small venting cuts, apply herbs that might slow the poison. Her fingers trembled as she worked, but every movement sent fresh waves of agony coursing through her body. Sweat ran down her face and her breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. She realized with a sinking heart that she couldn't make it back to the village in time. The venom was spreading too fast. Her mind raced, desperate for a plan. She glanced toward the distant tree line, hoping for some sign of life, anyone who might help, but the plains stretched empty, vast and indifferent. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. For someone who had always relied on her own strength, the thought of needing someone else was almost unbearable. Her pride and stubbornness warred with the stark, undeniable reality. She needed help, and soon. Then she heard it, a faint sound at first, but unmistakable, hooves pounding the earth, steady and purposeful. The sound grew closer and hope flickered weakly in her chest. Through the shimmering heat and golden grass, a figure emerged, a man on horseback, alone, riding with a calm yet urgent precision that suggested experience and determination. He slowed as he drew nearer, taking in the scene with sharp eyes. It was Luke, the rancher who lived on the edge of the valley. Known among travelers as a solitary man, he was a figure of strength and quiet resilience, a man whose hands bore the calluses of years of labor and whose eyes seemed to understand the land as if it spoke to him. Ayani's heart pounded, not just from the pain, but from the sudden awareness that her fate now rested in his hands. "Hold on!" his voice called out, cutting through the morning air. Dismounting with practiced ease, he hurried toward her. There was no hesitation in his movements, only a focused urgency. Ayani flinched, unsure if she could trust anyone, especially a stranger. But the venomous fire in her leg left her no choice. Luke knelt beside her, assessing the bite with quick, confident movements. His hands were rough, yet gentle, as he touched her skin, inspecting the swelling and the puncture marks. "You're going to be okay," he said calmly, though his eyes mirrored concern. "We just need to slow it down." Ayani's pride flared immediately. She didn't need anyone, she reminded herself. She had survived countless dangers in the wild, faced storms, wild animals, and human threats alike. But the venom was relentless, and her body was growing weaker with each passing moment. She allowed him to work, despite herself, wincing at every touch, every movement of the makeshift bandages and herbal poultices he applied. Luke's hands moved methodically. He cut small venting lines around the bite to relieve pressure, applied herbal poultices he had prepared for livestock injuries, and tied the area carefully to slow the spread of venom. Ayani bit her lip, keeping her screams in check, and slowly began to trust the steady rhythm of his movements. His touch was firm but careful, precise but compassionate. "You're strong," he said quietly, almost as if to himself, "but you don't have to do this alone." Her eyes met his, a mixture of defiance and vulnerability reflecting in them. She had always been taught to survive on her own, to rely on nothing but her own skill and resilience. But now, looking into his steady, unwavering gaze, she realized that survival sometimes required more than just strength. It required trust. Hours blurred together as Luke lifted her onto his horse, supporting her as the landscape rushed past in a golden haze. Ayani clung to him, her body heavy with exhaustion and pain, and for the first time she allowed herself to relax, to let someone else take control. The wind whipped past them, carrying the scent of dust and wild grass, but she felt a fragile sense of safety she hadn't known in years. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was low in the sky, painting everything in hues of fire and amber. Luke carried her inside, laying her gently on a bed of blankets. He worked quickly to clean and dress the wound, his movements precise and unhurried, a quiet testament to his competence and care. Ayani watched him, her chest tight with emotion, words failing her in the face of such unexpected kindness. "I know you're used to doing everything yourself," he said softly. "But sometimes strength isn't about standing alone. It's about letting someone in when you need them most." She wanted to argue, to insist she didn't need help, but the truth burned brighter than her pride ever could. A single tear escaped, tracing a line down her cheek, and she whispered, almost to herself, "Thank you." That night, the stars blanketed the sky outside, vast and eternal. Neither of them spoke much, but the silence was comfortable, filled with a new, fragile understanding. Ayani had survived the bite, but she had gained something more, a recognition that sometimes allowing oneself to be vulnerable could be a form of strength far greater than enduring pain alone. And as she drifted into a fevered sleep, her body exhausted but alive, she realized that her life had changed forever. The rancher who had appeared out of nowhere, rough-handed and steady-eyed, had not only saved her from death, he had opened a door she had kept firmly closed for years. And she did not know yet what lay beyond it, but for the first time she felt a spark of hope that life, even in its wildest and cruelest moments, could bring unexpected salvation. The first morning on Cole Maddox's ranch came slowly, as if the sun itself hesitated before spilling over the endless plains. Nita woke before dawn, the chill of the cabin creeping through the thin walls, and found herself staring at the rough wooden floor, listening to the steady sound of Cole moving outside. He was chopping wood, the heavy rhythm of the axe striking the logs echoing through the air. For the first time since their capture, she felt a strange sense of safety, fragile but undeniable. Lona stirred beside her, rubbing her eyes and stretching her stiff limbs. She whispered, "Do you think he'll hurt us?" Nita shook her head. "No, he's different." She couldn't explain it yet. The calm authority in his voice, the quiet way he handled them without claiming them as property. There was no malice in him, no laughter at their expense, no cruelty in his commands. He had simply bought them and then allowed them to exist as themselves. Breakfast was a modest affair. Cole had cooked a simple stew of beans and dried meat over the fire. The sisters ate slowly, cautiously, tasting the warmth of food without the usual fear of someone striking them if they faltered. Cole didn't sit with them, didn't demand conversation. He merely handed them bowls and nodded, going back to mend a fence that had been broken during the previous night's windstorm. The work on the ranch was grueling. Nita learned to handle horses, repair fences, and carry water from the nearby creek. Lona, smaller and weaker, tended the garden and fed the chickens, slowly regaining strength. Cole never forced them. He never praised unnecessarily either. His approval was quiet, expressed in a nod, a brief glance, or a small remark about a job well done. It was enough to make them realize that for the first time in years, their work mattered not for someone else's amusement or profit, but for survival, for life. Weeks passed, and the sisters began to trust the rhythm of the ranch. They learned the language of the land, the way the horses moved, how the wind predicted rain, how the soil smelled before it would dry and crack. Nita spent hours with Cole, learning to ride the horses and mend saddles. She began to respect the man for his skill and patience, though her pride kept her from admitting it aloud. Lona's laughter returned in small bursts as she chased a dog across the field or sang while gathering firewood. Slowly, the cabin filled with a fragile warmth, a sense of home that neither sister had felt in years. But peace is rarely permanent in the borderlands. One evening, Cole spotted dust rising over the horizon, 4 riders, moving fast and with purpose. His jaw tightened as recognition flashed in his eyes. The trader who had sold them, the cruel man who had laughed at their fear, was coming back, and he had brought others. He turned to the sisters. "Inside, now." Nita hesitated. Fear and rage battled within her. "No, we won't hide," she said. "They took everything from us. We won't run from them now." Cole's eyes softened, but his hand rested on the revolver at his hip. "If you stand outside, you risk your lives." "I know the risk," Nita said. "But if they touch Lona, I'll fight." The riders reached the corral, their horses kicking up dust and dirt as they dismounted. The trader's cruel grin cut across his scarred face. "Well, well," he sneered. "Looks like someone thinks they can steal my merchandise." Cole stepped forward, calm but dangerous. "I paid for them," he said evenly. "They are not yours." The trader laughed. "You may have paid, but the law doesn't care about Apache girls. Hand them over and no one gets hurt. Refuse, and we'll see how fast that law protects you." The air was tense. The men spread around the corral, rifles raised, confident in their intimidation. Cole's hand hovered near his gun, ready. "You'll have to get through me first," he said, his voice low and steady. The first shot cracked, sending a bullet whistling past Cole's shoulder. He dropped behind a trough, cursing under his breath as the others fired. Nita moved instinctively, grabbing the rifle she had learned to use by watching him, and aimed at the trader who had dared to lift his gun toward Lona. Her hands trembled violently, but her aim was true. The shot struck his shoulder, sending him sprawling into the dirt. The other men hesitated, unsure, and then fled. Silence fell. Dust hung in the air, mixing with the smoke from the first shot. Nita sank to her knees, shaking with adrenaline and fear. Cole limped toward her, his arm bleeding where a bullet had grazed him. His eyes were filled with a mixture of relief and admiration. "You saved her," he said, voice rough with pain. "No," Nita whispered, voice breaking. "We saved each other." That night, under a blood-red moon, they sat by the fire. Cole's wound had been tended, bandaged hastily, but he refused to let them fuss over it. The flames cast flickering shadows across their faces, highlighting the exhaustion, fear, and relief etched in every line. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. "If you stay here, it's because you choose to. No chains, no debts, no obligations." Nita looked at him, really looked, for the first time. Here was a man who had bought them, yes, but not to own them. He had bought them to free them, to give them a choice they hadn't had in years. Her throat tightened as she realized the magnitude of what he had done. "We'll stay," she said finally, her voice firm but gentle. "Not because we're yours, but because we choose to be." Lona leaned against her, smiling softly, her small hand finding Nita's. The warmth of trust and safety spread through them, tentative but powerful. The desert night seemed less cold, the wind gentler, the stars brighter. Years later, travelers passing near Dusty Creek would speak of a ranch run by a cowboy and 2 Apache women. They would say the land was sacred, not because of what was built there, but because it was built on mercy, courage, and choice. And sometimes, in the glow of sunset, The story of the cowboy who had chosen to save rather than own would echo across the plains, a reminder that even in the darkest places, humanity and compassion could flourish. Cole Maddox, Nita and Lona would never forget that night. It was the night their lives truly began, bound not by chains but by choice, courage, and the unspoken promise that freedom could be earned, protected, and cherished. The bond between them grew stronger, forged in fire, fear, and trust. A bond that would endure the harshness of the frontier and the tests of time. A living testament to the power of compassion in a world built on cruelty. By dawn, the first light touched the horizon, painting the plains with gold. Cole, Nita, and Lona stood together, looking out at the land that was now theirs in more than just survival. They had fought, they had feared, and they had won something far greater than life itself. They had won choice, dignity, and eke.